The Blackmail of Ross Perot.
Mr. Reagan.
First, I want to plug my friend Sebastian Gorka's new Sunday show on Newsmax. It's called Reality Check. I was just texting him the other day, and he's like, turn on Newsmax. And I'm like, dude, you've got a new show. And if I didn't know about it, I'm guessing that a lot of you didn't know about it as well. So now I've got a favorite new Sunday show, and I think this will become your favorite new Sunday show as well. It's on every Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 4 p.m. Pacific. Please tune into that. Great show. Awesome first show, by the way. So check that out as soon as you get a chance. All right, now let's get into it. A while back, I made a video called What Happened to John Durham? Why hasn't the mainstream media reported on any of Biden's corruption over the years? Why don't they report on the misdeeds of the FBI or the CIA? They used to. Why haven't the FBI looked into Hunter Biden's crimes? How is it that Eric Swalwell's relationship with a Chinese spy was never made public? Certainly, lots of people in D.C. knew about it. Why didn't the Mueller investigation seem to incriminate anyone who perpetrated the Russian collusion hoax? There was tons of criminality there, yet nobody's indicted. Why hasn't Durham arrested anyone yet or even presented an interim report? How is it that election perpetrated in a presidential election so significant that it actually subverted the will of the people? How is it that such is even possible in America? And why hasn't the FBI looked into this obvious election? And perhaps most importantly, why has everyone, Washington politicians, the press, the CIA, the FBI, etc., why has everyone been so desperate to get Donald Trump out of office? Well, I think I finally figured it all out. In that video, I laid out a hypothesis about Democrats. Democrats, I postulate, have been so corrupt in recent years that their corruption could not simply have been motivated by individual ambition for power or money. Though these ambitions are certainly strong in many Democrat politicians, ordinarily the thirst for power and the greed for gold are tempered, at least a little, by the fear of criminal prosecution or even a damaged reputation. But the Democrats have been acting lately as if they have no fear of reprisal, no matter what they do. They don't seem to fear losing votes, they don't seem to fear a damaged reputation, and they don't seem to fear criminal prosecution. And this would only be true, they would only not fear any of these things, if they had a reason not to fear losing votes, as in perhaps there was a system in place that they believed would ensure electoral wins no matter what. And also, they would need to have some kind of an assurance that the reputations would be protected. Now, we know that's already in place with the sycophantic mainstream media and the major social media platforms literally banning news stories that make Democrats look bad, the biggest example of which is, of course, the Hunter Biden laptop story. And Democrats would also have to have some protection against prosecution. And I have no evidence to indicate that Democrats do indeed have protection against prosecution, but I would point to the clearly criminal activities of Hunter Biden and the accusations against Joe Biden of corruption in Ukraine and China. And I would ask you to consider why neither of these men have faced any consequence for their actions. I would also point to the Durham investigation, which is why the video that I made previously was called What Happened to John Durham. And I would invite you to consider why no one has been charged with any crime regarding to the illegal spying on Donald Trump's presidential campaign in 2016, which is a far more sinister conspiracy than anything that was done in 1972 during the Watergate scandal. I mean, it seems to me that Democrats have become so bold that even if there were these assurances in place that I just mentioned, assurances against losing votes, against losing reputation, and against being criminally prosecuted, I mean, there's still a risk when Democrats act unethically. And despite that risk, Democrats have acted in an astonishingly unethical manner over the past few years. They spied on Trump illegally. They then claimed that he conspired with Russia to fix the 2016 election, which they knew was false. They then claimed that he conspired with Ukraine to fix the 2020 election, which they also knew was false. They then used COVID to shut down the country and completely change the way voting is conducted in America to try to help Joe Biden with the election. Now, of course, since I'm sure our benevolent overlords at YouTube are watching, I naturally need to mention that the election itself was 100% legitimate, and this show would never make any claim to the contrary. Ever. Democrats then claim that Trump orchestrated an insurrection, which they also knew was false. And, there were a million other unethical tactics that they employed in between those major actions. And these unethical actions are extremely bold. They go far beyond what would be expected of somebody who's merely motivated by ambition. And so what is it? What could it be? Why do they feel compelled to do this? And why do they feel free to do this? Oh, you know what? I just remembered something. This is really annoying, but unfortunately, because I have to eat and pay rent, I'm going to have to sell you something. Research into 5G's architecture reveals your mobile service could be maliciously used against you. New findings show 5G could be used to exploit your data and cause DDoS, distributed denial of service attacks, through security flaws in the cellular networks. As with any disruptive technology, hackers and corporations will always look for ways to exploit it at the cost of you and your privacy. This is why I highly recommend Virtual Shield. Virtual Shield is my favorite VPN because unlike typical VPNs, they have a strict no-log policy and there's no hidden fees. It's fast, secure, and easy to use. Even grandma can do it. And believe it or not, I do put on my Virtual Shield VPN when I am surfing the web. I didn't used to be so paranoid about privacy until January 6th. That changed a lot. Now the government is persecuting people for political beliefs and not simply prosecuting people for crimes. This is a very scary time. I highly encourage everyone to have a VPN and to turn it on whenever they use their computer, and you can also use it for your phone. So I highly recommend getting a VPN of some kind. Obviously, Virtual Shield has been a fantastic sponsor of this show, so please, if you're going to get a VPN, do consider going to Virtual Shield. Get Virtual Shield for 50% off by going to virtualshield.com/Mr. Reagan or by clicking on the link below. All right, now where was I? Oh yes, the unethical actions of Democrats have become extremely bold, and they go far beyond what would be expected of somebody who's merely motivated by ambition. And so what is it? What could it be? What motivates these people, and why do they feel that they can get away with doing all of this crazy stuff? Well, people are motivated by two things, the carrot and the stick. The carrot, of course, being something that you want, and the stick, of course, being a punishment that you're keen to avoid. But the carrot and the stick together, well, this is a very compelling combination. And the conclusion that I drew in that video, the video called What Happened to John Durham, the conclusion I drew, it's possible that there is some kind of system of corruption that has been established over the years in Washington, D.C. That is, it may be that there are many operators in Washington, D.C., established players outside of politics, possibly deep state operatives in the intelligence agencies, those who seem consistently to be appointed to important positions in government like Susan Rice, and of course, career politicians like Nancy Pelosi. Now, it may be that there are a number of these people who wield power over a lot of other people in D.C., including politicians, and these operatives who wield this power, well, they may do so using blackmail. And this system of blackmail may give the most powerful operators power, but it may also give some of the low-level players power as well. And if a lot of people have a little dirt on a lot of other people, and if everyone is compromised, then no one can be exposed, or else everyone goes down. It's like a circle of dominoes. You knock one down, they all go down. It's what's sometimes called mutually assured destruction. In the case of ambition, people will only go so far in pushing toward unethical behavior, and they're unlikely to do anything that might be considered criminal if they think that they might be exposed. However, if one is being blackmailed or threatened in some other way, well, people are very likely to act unethically. This is a phenomenon that emerges from desperation. If you're not a particularly violent person, it's unlikely that you would physically assault somebody just to get a bit of money. But if you knew that unless you hurt this person, your child will die, you will very likely become a violent person instantly. Desperation is a very powerful motivator. So things that somebody is unwilling to do just to get money or power, they may in fact be willing to do if they are threatened severely enough. Now, all of this about a system of Democrat blackmail in D.C. is, of course, all wild speculation, and I admitted as much in the video that I made, the video entitled What Happened to John Durham. And yet still, for some reason, YouTube took that video down. You can't see it anymore on YouTube. If you want to watch it, you have to go to Rumble. The video had about 70,000 views, and YouTube didn't just demonetize it or restrict its distribution. They took it down completely. Now, I have not had very many videos actually taken down like that. That's a pretty extreme thing for YouTube to do. YouTube says that they only do this when a video is spreading dangerous conspiracy theories and stuff like that. Well, whatever YouTube deems to be dangerous, I guess. But this video that I made, it did no such thing. This was not something that was popularized on 4chan or by Alex Jones. This is not something that I was repeating from some dubious source. This was just a theory that I had developed myself. This was not the distribution of a dangerous idea. This was merely speculation drawn from what I was seeing happening in the federal government by Democrats. And so it makes you wonder, why did YouTube take that video down? As a lot of people have mentioned on the comments of some of my other videos, you tend to take flack when you're over the target. Maybe the reason that video got taken down is because somebody recognized that I was too close to the truth. Who knows? I predicted at the time that if Democrats gained control of the White House and of Congress, well, they'd do away with the filibuster. They'd make D.C. and Puerto Rico states. They'd establish mail-in voting as standard, and they would pack the Supreme Court. And what are the Democrats doing right now? They're turning the gears on all of these things. And these are all highly contentious actions. But Democrats, if I'm right about their blackmail schemes, would indeed have the ability to do this because even though many politicians and other actors in D.C. do recognize that these things are extreme, they're highly unpopular and, in some cases, unconstitutional, they would still go along, of course, if they were being threatened. And because of my analysis of the corruption of Democrats in D.C., somebody reminded me that Ross Perot had once dealt with precisely this kind of thing. He had been leveraged to get out of the presidential race by somebody threatening his daughter. And although YouTube is trying to silence those of us who are trying merely to work out exactly what's going on in D.C., those of us who are merely critical of Democrats and don't simply go along with what Nancy Pelosi tells us all the time as pure truth, despite YouTube censoring me in spite of my genuinely innocent intentions, and maybe because of that, I do feel that I need to support my hypothesis with some concrete examples. The example of the threat against Ross Perot is unique because unlike much of the other instances of corruption in D.C., which I'll be covering in the next few weeks, this one is purported to have been executed by a Republican, specifically George Bush Sr. Now, many conservatives today have realized that the Bush family may have always been more interested in preserving the deep state than in the welfare of the nation. Now, whether that's true or not, the story I'm about to go over indeed indicates the willingness of a politician to engage in this kind of threatening behavior. Allegedly. And what's more, this shouldn't run too harshly against the radical left agenda of YouTube as I'm criticizing a Republican here. And so today I'm going to tell you the story of the blackmail of Ross Perot. All right, so this article that I'm going to read here, this is from the Los Angeles Times in October 26, 1992. The headline is, Ross Perot charges plot forced him out. Looney, GOP says. A campaign says he accuses Bush camp of plan to smear daughter and disrupt her wedding and says he quit race to protect her. Texan offers no proof for allegations. So obviously the author of this article, Paul Richter, is very skeptical of Ross Perot's accusation here. And indeed, a lot of people were very skeptical of Ross Perot when he said this, and he was even ridiculed mercilessly on both Saturday Night Live and in Living Color, which was popular at the time.
She told me that the Republican Party was planning to drug me and my family, yank out our dental work, and replace them with transmitters inside our fillings.
You check out any stoplight in any major city. See how many young, hard-working black men jump on your car and clean the windshield.
But as much as people ridiculed him and didn't believe him, I don't think Ross Perot would make something like this up. It's kind of a bizarre story to make up. And in fact, as I'll mention later, I don't think Ross Perot actually was telling the truth. I think he was actually being nice, because I think Ross Perot suspected something even more sinister, because I think the disruption of a wedding wouldn't be enough to force somebody to drop out of a race. But let's go ahead and read this article and we'll see exactly what happened here in 1992. This is written in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The journalist writes, Independent presidential candidate Ross Perot accused President Bush's campaign Sunday of plotting to fake a photograph to smear his youngest daughter, of conspiring to disrupt her wedding, and of hiring an ex-CIA employee to wiretap his computerized stock trading program and ruin him. Perot said the plotting was the real reason he dropped out of the campaign for 11 weeks. He said he wanted to spare his daughter Caroline the pain that such dirty tricks could cause. After the wedding in August, Perot said that he told her what he had done, and he said that she replied, "Get back into the race." He did on October 1st, but at that point, his race had already been destroyed. His campaign had already been destroyed. So it's kind of pointless for him to get into the race. "Preposterous," said Merlin Fitzwater, the president's spokesman, in a response to Perot's dirty tricks allegation. Margaret Tutwiler, the White House communications director, declared, "It's all loony." Bobby R. Birchfeld, general counsel for the Bush campaign, said he investigated Perot's charges. There is absolutely nothing to them. Okay, so somebody in the Bush campaign said he investigated something that the campaign was accused of and said, "Oh, I mean, I've looked into it, and I didn't do it. I investigated myself, and what I found was that I didn't do anything wrong." Oh, we'll just take your word for it then. Perot made the accusation at campaign rallies in Pittsburgh and Flemington, New Jersey, and in interviews with the Boston Herald and the CBS TV program 60 Minutes, which I could not find, by the way. That's something that I find highly suspicious about this story. Is like, it's kind of been erased from the internet. And I don't know if that's, like, there's a reason for that, or that's just, like, something that people don't remember happening, and so nobody's uploading videos about it. But I'm sure there were a lot of local news stories about it. I mean, I'm sure it was on every news network talking about it. But I only found one short clip talking about it.
In the last 24 hours, you have Ross Perot saying the real reason he quit the race in mid-July was not anything he had said before, but because he feared a dirty trick was going to be played on his daughter Caroline by the Bush campaign, which led the president's spokesman to say Mr. Perot is a paranoid with crazy ideas. Our first report is from ABC's Mort Dean.
Perot showed up unexpectedly at his campaign's regular morning briefing. He repeated that he quit the campaign back in July only because someone had called to warn him that the Bush campaign organization was planning to ruin his daughter's August wedding.
He had seen a doctored photograph that they were going to give the tabloids to smear my daughter before her wedding, and that they were going to disrupt the wedding in the church.
So, yeah, I don't know why. It seems to have been deleted from history, this event. I mean, it's a little suspicious. I don't mean to suggest that that's concrete proof of wrongdoing, but it does seem a little bit odd that I can't find any videos about this. He told voters in Pittsburgh that he had no proof of his allegations and asked them to put his accusations out of their minds. Don't spend 5 minutes fretting about it because it's irrelevant to fixing our country. Perot's allegations could add to momentum that he is showing in the polls if voters believe his charges. His accusations also could backfire, however, and simply renew voter concern about what his critics say is his conspiratorial view of the world. Perot's standing in the polls fell when reporters saying that he has a penchant for conspiracies were broadcast and published earlier this year. And I think that probably had something to do with what happened here, because if that was the attack on Perot, that he is prone to conspiracy theories, then somebody probably knew that all they had to do was threaten him with something, and it would make him sound crazy. I don't know exactly how Perot was threatened, because if you threaten somebody in a way that is particularly sinister, and they're genuinely afraid of, for the lives of like their children or themselves or something like that, they may not completely be willing to admit the full extent of the threats, because they may feel like, okay, I can kind of explain what happened, but if I go full on, they may just kill my daughter. Right. So I don't know exactly what he was threatened with. He says that basically that he was threatened with, them smearing his daughter and then going and disrupting the wedding. But it doesn't seem like enough to me. Like, I wouldn't drop out of a race for that. I would only drop out of a race if somebody was basically like, I will kill your entire family. And even then, I mean, how much do I like my family? Anyway, needless to say, what Perot said did not help his campaign. And in fact, I think probably eventually tanked it. But let's see here. Perot identified only one source for his information, a man named Scott Barnes, who he said called to pass along information about Americans missing in action in Vietnam. In the early 1980s, Barnes joined a team to hunt down POWs in South Asia. Barnes claimed blah, 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 blah. They're basically saying that they don't think that Barnes is credible. Perot said that 2 additional sources gave him information about the Dirty Tricks plot. He declined to identify them. He called one a friend and the other a person that I respect. The first tip, Perot said, I just listened to. The second raised my level of concern. The third one, I said, that's a risk I can't take. In the interview with the Herald, Perot said that he got his first tip alleging dirty tricks from a very prominent Republican from another part of the country. He said the Republican told him about a meeting to discuss how hard it was to keep Perot's early candidacy from climbing in the polls. Somebody at the meeting, Perot said, mentioned this man adores his family. Perot said he learned soon afterwards that Republican operatives had started interviewing everybody who has known my children since childhood. At that point, Perot got his second tip. 60 Minutes reported that Barnes telephoned Perot's office and left a message about a doctored photo of Caroline Perot. 60 Minutes said Barnes told its correspondents that he had seen the photograph. Perot told the Herald they were going to smear her with this fake photograph that they had done with a computer where you put a head on another body. He said the Republicans intended to give the doctored photo to tabloid newspapers. You know, back then, that was like phenomenal technology. I mean, no one would think twice about that anymore. Of course, that's possible, but this was back in 1992. They didn't exactly, have Photoshop on everybody's computers back then. At this point, Perot told the Herald he received a third tip. This was a very prominent, wired-in guy who was part of the Republican Party who contacted me and said, Ross, they're going to try to embarrass you and your daughter at the church. They were actually going to have people at the church disrupt her wedding. That, Perot declared, got my attention. Perot said he kept the information from his daughter, but he said he decided to drop out of the presidential race when he announced his decision on July 16th. He said that publicly that he was doing it because the Democratic Party had revitalized. In addition, he said both parties were focusing on his biggest concern, the economy. He also said at the time that he didn't want to throw the election into the House of Representatives. Okay, I mean, this is just weird. To me, he was clearly very scared. Otherwise, he would have just explained, people have promised to disrupt this wedding and to embarrass my daughter, and it's just not worth it for me anymore. But he was scared enough that he was covering for the people that were threatening him. In truth, he told his campaign rally Sunday afternoon in Pittsburgh, I could not allow my daughter's happiest day of her life or one of them to be ruined because of me. I stepped back to protect her. Come on, it's not just embarrassment. It's something more than that. The day he pulled out of the race, Perot told the Herald Bush telephoned him and suggested they meet. I read this article already, and this kind of goes into some details about how the Bush campaign never met with him and they promised to, and the Bush campaign says, well, actually, we told him to pick a time and he didn't, and it's just a stupid, I'm not going to read this. Tutwiler confirmed that Perot had spoken to Baker during one of 2 meetings they had after Perot dropped out of the race, but she said that Perot spoke only in general terms about Republican dirty tricks. There was no evidence presented, Tutwiler said. It was a conclusive type of statement. Baker thought it was far-fetched. When asked what she meant by a conclusive type of statement, she replied that Perot had simply stated his suspicions. Mr. Perot did not ask Secretary Baker to do anything. In Pittsburgh, Perot said he understood that Republicans had denied his allegations to reporters for 60 Minutes. I fully accept the indirect denial, he said. But he added that he never got a denial face-to-face. With the final wedding plans underway, Perot told the Herald that he learned of a massive plan to wiretap the code numbers used by his corporation to deal on international financial markets. He said he was told about the plot by somebody involved. Why do they want to wiretap me? Perot said that he asked the informant, whom he did not identify. He said, why do they want to wiretap me? I'm already out of the race. And he said that they're mainly interested in your financial transactions. They figure the best thing is that unless they ruin you financially, you may do this again. I mean, does this sound familiar? I mean, this is crazy. This is exactly what happened to Trump, right? I mean, back during the January 6th, protests, which they were calling an insurrection, they said, we need to impeach Trump so that he can never run for office again. That's exactly what they said about Trump. They do not like outsiders becoming president. If you're not one of the club, you're not allowed to be president. This is how this country works now. It's incredibly disturbing. Okay. At that point, Perot said, I just handed it over to the FBI and I walked away from it. He said the lead wiretapper was a man from Arizona who has been a contract employee for the CIA. Barnes said that in the past that he lives in Prescott, Arizona, and that he's done work for the CIA. I happen to know the top real estate agent in Prescott, Arizona. She's fantastic. Good friend, very smart girl. Perot said he also received a videotape of the little guy from Arizona sitting on a park bench in Dallas talking to a very senior person in the Bush campaign for 20 minutes. You'd think they were fraternity brothers. I mean, they were patting each other on the knee, they were slapping each other on the back, they were shaking hands, and this was a day before the wiretap was supposed to occur. The Herald said Perot declined to identify the campaign official or to say how he got the videotape. Perot said he turned it over to the FBI. Correspondent Leslie Stahl on 60 Minutes said Barnes had told its reporters that the Bush campaign had recruited him to do the wiretapping. Perot said his tipster on the wiretap plot had sent him an accurate diagram of his office layout complete with telephone numbers that they wanted bugged. In his 60 Minutes interview, Perot described the alleged Republican plotting as Watergate 2. He said the plotting was not done by low-level campaign operatives. This was run at the top. And then they did like a sting operation in the Dallas FBI office, and they said that proved that there was no wrongdoing or anything like that. And we'll get down here, and it says, Fitzwater, the White House spokesman, dismissed Perot's charges as a fanciful effort to embarrass the president in the final days of the campaign. The stuff about his daughter is just crazy, the presidential spokesman told reporters as Bush campaigned in the Rocky Mountain West. It's preposterous. There haven't been any dirty tricks against Ross Perot. It's crazy, and he's been told that, and he knows it. There's nothing to it. Now, here's the thing about things that are preposterous, right? That sometimes makes things rather easy to get away with, right? This is something that Dinesh D'Souza often talks about. This was a plot technique of the 1930s Germans, right, where you would say something that seemed so outlandish that somebody wouldn't be able to make it up, right? You would lie. They call it the big lie, right? The big lie. And so most of the time you act perfectly innocent and nice and you don't do anything wrong and you're like, you're perfect. You don't push into unethical political behavior in any way whatsoever. Then when you have to pull off something that's like massively corrupt, you can do so and nobody will believe it, because normally you wouldn't even go near anything unethical. So it's a matter of being very, very, at least appearing to be very, very clean, and then doing something massively corrupt or saying something that's a massive lie after being honest for a very long time. You can afford to do massively corrupt things every once in a while if the rest of the time you are perfectly clean and you don't edge anywhere near anything that even seems unethical. So that's why this is something that I think some people found it very difficult to believe that the Bush people would do something like this. I don't find it difficult to believe. I may have found it unbelievable a couple of years ago, but not anymore. Now look, I've always thought that Ross Perot's involvement in the 1992 campaign was a mistake. He took enough votes from George Bush Sr. to allow Bill Clinton to win. Many people have been critical of Perot for this, and I agree with them. I think that a deep state conservative is always going to be better than a deep state Democrat. And I also think that Bill Clinton's tenure in the White House established all the corruption that we're now dealing with in Washington today. Now, some conspiracy theory types might want to speculate that Perot was working for the Clintons in some way, but that certainly was not the case. But Ross Perot was different. I mean, he really was truly a maverick. He was the Donald Trump of his day. And had his daughter not been threatened, the man may actually have won the presidency. And what a different world we'd be living in now had that been the case. But as it is, Clinton got into office, and in many ways, America has been deteriorating ever since. Now, do I think that George Bush himself ordered this threat to Perot's daughter? I mean, I really doubt that, but somebody certainly did. It's unlikely that Perot would just have made that up out of thin air. It was a threat that Perot took very seriously. He genuinely believed that there were people in Washington, D.C. that were going to target his daughter in a sinister way unless he dropped out of the race. And so, to protect his family, he did. And perhaps Perot's daughter was never in any real danger at all. And I think that's likely. But Perot was scared. And that is the effect of the stick that I was talking about before. People will obey if they're scared. And I'm going to go a bit off course here for a moment. The current state of the swamp in D.C. may not be Bill Clinton and Barack Obama's fault alone. Remember that George Bush Sr., before being chosen by Ronald Reagan for vice president, was in fact the director of the CIA. It may in fact have been during his time in office that the CIA gained the power that they now have in D.C., whatever power that may be. In future videos, I'll be talking more about the corrupt Democrats in Washington and how they seem to be able to get away with just about anything. So stay tuned for that. And remember to tune in to Gorka's news show, Reality Check, on Newsmax. It's Eastern Time, it's 7 p.m. and 10 p.m., and then West Coast Time, it's 4 p.m. and then 7 p.m. So tune into that every Sunday, and go online and check out the last one from last Sunday. It is definitely well worth checking out. And remember, it's not that our liberal friends are ignorant, it's just they know so much that is not so. Good night.
The goal for all of us should be that one day things will be done neither because of nor in spite of any of the differences between us, ethnic differences or racial differences, whatever they may be, that we will have total equal opportunity for all people. And I would do everything I could in my power to bring that about.